post show phase, again, taking into consideration not only the physiological and psychological changes, but now also this very unique situation that bodybuilding presents, which is just like, now what? And also like, what if I didn't place how I wanted to? And like, how do I feel now about my self-worth? And we start to uncover a lot of really, really challenging things. And they all seem to hit at the same time, which is so terrible. Like weight sticks so weird. I don't care who your coach is. I don't care what reverse you're on. And after a show, when you are absolutely shredded and you start to gain weight, I have yet to meet someone where it just kind of like comes back on. It is like, it feels like there's like a paint like brush where they're just like splashing like adipose tissue on. Like it's so awkward. You're like, why do I feel like I have fat here, but like not here? And then it's such an uncomfortable feeling, right? And then of course for like women, I feel like it always just like, we always just notice it in like our stomachs and like our faces first. And we're like, why not the glutes? Why not like literally anywhere else besides here? And then of course, couple that with like, let's say like hypothetical, you just finished out your season. You didn't place how you wanted to, right? Like, which is a real reality that we have to consider. There's only, one winner in every show. So you didn't place how you wanted to. You've had a really long prep, and maybe you kind of ignored the other things in your life during your prep because you were so focused on this. And now the show is over. You don't have the outcome that you were desiring, that you worked towards. All the things in your life that you've been ignoring are still there, but they feel really magnified. And everything feels really magnified because you're really fucking hungry and like run down, and you probably don't have super great hormones. So there's just like a lot that's all happening right after for individuals. And it cannot be overstated how challenging that is, regardless of what strategies you're using.
Yes. And I think that is the raw and honest truth, is that, my mindset post show, like, yes, there are individuals who come out of it, let's just say seemingly easier. But even then, I'm very skeptical when individuals, I feel like there's a little bit of a honeymoon period. But
Yep.
foremost, what they're looking at, what they can expect is dysregulation, and in quite physically moving in the opposite direction of what they've been moving towards for the last several months. And for some, that prep, even that pre-prep period, that gearing up for the contest prep itself, you might be looking at the past year. Now it feels like you're very much undoing that yarn. And I think like Team 3D MJ, Eric Helms, Alberto Nunez, all the guys, they are very, like a very good beacon within the space on the recovery diet, and really pushing like, hey, we got to get you out of that danger zone, that zone where like, just quite frankly, nothing productive is happening. But the longer we try to hold on to this, ultimately, it's just going to make that re-regulation that much harder. And for a lot of people, like, even those that are highly motivated, highly disciplined, I still feel like some degree of acceptance of like, you're not going to be able to execute perfectly. So what can we do to calibrate expectations? And I believe this was one of your podcasts from forever ago. I don't even know who it was with, but you were talking about like intentionally building in, like, you're going to have those untracked meals. You're going to have meals where maybe the intention is to loosely track or even like just make good decisions. But we're going to build this in knowing that you're probably still not going to be perfect. Like, but this is a lot better of a strategy. Like, we're landing the plane. And if we try to land this with the expectation that you're going to do it perfectly, you're probably going to crash. So like, even though this might not be pretty and this might not be what you hoped it would be, it's still going to be better than the alternative.
I love what you said about the honeymoon phase, and I do want to touch on that really quickly because there is definitely a period, and not for every client, but for some clients where they are prepared, they are expected for this to be really hard, and then it's kind of like not the first 2 weeks, right? They're like, wow, I feel really great, everything's amazing, and then it's like 4 weeks in, like the rug gets pulled out of them, and then they still feel that way, right? So there is some times where it can be tricky, but I have yet to meet one person, whether I've coached them or I just know them, who doesn't struggle in some capacity across some domain post-competition. And this is not to blame bodybuilding. This is not to blame anything, your coach, you, yourself, nothing. This is just the realities of what we're dealing with. And I think that it's just really important to give yourself that grace, but also build in those strategies of like, okay, what are my expectations? How can I actually manage this? And yeah, adding in untracked meals is probably one of my favorite things to do. And it seems really counterintuitive because we're thinking, okay, hey, the body is like primed physically to gain body fat, right? Based on all of the different hormonal and metabolic adaptations that are happening. Okay. Insatiable hunger, all of these different things. Primed to gain body fat, and psychologically maybe not in the best, most sound of mind place right now based on like my body image and just kind of how I'm feeling. Why would we add in all of this flexibility right now? But I have found in my experience that most people do better, like net better, whatever percentage better than if we were to not do that. And my goal as a coach is always like, we don't need perfection. How can we move forward productively though? So for me, I found that having that, and it goes back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, where we're going to fully be present and fully enjoy this. When I tell a client like, hey, Corey, I know that you've just been prepping for, this past year, and I really want you to go have like a date night or like go have like a girls' night out or go do whatever. And like, I want you to order what you want. There's no restrictions here. I want you just to be present and be mindful, but just eat your meal, order whatever. And then the next day we can be right back on plan. That is so much more satisfying to someone than me being like, yeah, add 20 carbs for this refeed. And, like you can go out to eat, but like make sure it's like a plain potato. Like nobody fucking wants that. Okay. And everybody, and here's the thing, even if someone does that for a few weeks, there might be a point where they crack. Or what we really want to avoid is any kind of overeating episodes. And that is going to happen to so many individuals, even if you have the strongest relationship with food. It is just bound to happen after, and it is much more psychologically damaging at that point because you're so delicate at that time. Also, again, physiologically very delicate. So if we start to compound like these like binge eating episodes, this is when we start to get the really, really rapid fat gain. And then that's when in 2 months, the client wants to diet again. And they're in quite literally the worst position to go into a deficit. So if we can avoid that, that is my number one goal. So that's why I like the untracked meals, even though they seem a little counterintuitive. I like those early on.
I think that's so relevant for a lot of listeners, even non-competitors who maybe
Yeah.
are wrapping up the fat loss phase, who are still finding like, well, I still want to come out of this. I want to come out of this, but hunger signaling, those adaptations are there. I think um, another tip and another like strategy I've used is post show or even post fat loss phase, getting to like allowing myself and really even forcing myself to romanticize those things that weirdly at the end of prep, they're still low calorie, but we weren't able to indulge in. So having like 400 grams of watermelon, be like, yeah, I know this is way too much. This is excess, but it's really good. And I don't have to check in pictures tomorrow, so I don't have to worry about my waist. Like, go crazy.
Watermelon's
Just
so good. So
it
good.
really no, it really is. And it's like do like binge on that. Like I dare you won't be able to. Like you
Yeah.
won't be able to make a dent. Like before any kind of like instance of going for the high calorie food. Like if you can do the watermelon, like I'm just and no one's taking me seriously cuz I'm not very serious on the internet to begin with. But no, like even like going back to hey, I know for the last 10 weeks, you've only been able to have like 100 grams of berries. I know you really like fruit. Okay, well, so with this caloric increase, I want you to indulge. I want you to indulge in those things that, frankly, you haven't had the luxury to think about for a long time. Instead of doing something, even like an untracked meal, like, can you do something at your house where it is still relatively
Yeah.
trackable? Maybe go get ingredients for like a stir fry, and that allows you to still stay within the constraints of like, well, this isn't going to be as calorically dense as me eating out, but I get to, kind of do the non-bodybuilder thing. I get to make a meal that's very micronutrient dense, that's very palatable. But again, I love that you're encouraging individuals to, one, be present and really, really explore like, okay, is this consumption or is this about the experience? Because I do think that that tendency to lean on food just for pure consumption, I think that I think it's novel and I think it's overrated, but I think it's also something that we get very comfortable with utilizing on a regular basis. But I know I've kept you for the last hour.
Oh, no, no,
The
I'm so
rain
fine.
sounds like it's
There's
sounds like it's there.
It actually isn't. So I'm like, oh no, are you hearing something else? No. So I'm in the, if anyone's listening, I am in a, we're might be hit with a hurricane, might not be. So it's where the rain has already started, the wind has started, Florida things, but I'm used to it. But yeah, I think this can go for not just post contest, but also just in general, right? So I want to make 2 points, so don't let me forget the second one. But just checking in with yourself, right? And this kind of goes back to the introspection of like, do I really want this? Do I really need this? Or is this just like a, ooh, like that kind of impulsive, like, let me go get this. And this is such a silly example for me. But you know, right now, like I mentioned, I'm back in school. So I think it's really easy when you're doing something that's like hard to be like, I want a treat, right? Which everybody, we can all get treats. Like I'm not against a treat. But I also still want to maintain some kind of like, you know, discipline in my life for certain things, right? So the other day I was like, oh, let me go get Starbucks. And I was like, I really want this, but I don't really need, like, there was something in my body that said, like, you don't need that today. You don't need the $6 coffee right now. And I was like, okay, I'm listening to that. Like, I'm not questioning it. I'm just saying I don't need it. So I think like over time, and that's such a small thing, like this isn't even like a calorie related thing, but this is just like a introspective and like a regulation thing that like you can get to the point where like you're checking in, like I said, is this consumption? Is this just like, do I feel like I have that need? Because there's like almost that like gnawing desire of like need that we can get. And anytime that comes up, I'm like, ooh, not a good time to indulge because I'm really not in the headspace that I need this when it kind of feels like that like gnawing sensation.
I oh gosh, I can relate to that so much, and
Right?
it's again not a food thing, but it was like a
No.
tech thing. Like I saw something that was not inexpensive, and I sent it to my boyfriend. I was like, "Oh, this is sick," and he's like, "You want it?" And I'm like, yeah, like yeah, but it's like I need to have some self control because
Mm-hmm.
I can't just be buying things like that. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, but no, if I set like a goal for like the next 6 weeks, and I'm like, okay, if I make this amount of income, then I could get that. Like and honestly, it felt really good. Like, it felt like there was dopamine even in that just temporary pause,
Mm-hmm.
but that very much translated for me. Later that day, I was like, that is a very similar feeling whenever we're at a nice restaurant, and I know my boyfriend shouldn't do this, but he's like, "50% is yours." I'm like, doesn't make sense. We're not the same size." But that's how relationships work, right? So he's like, "Here, 50%." I'm like, I okay, I'll for the things I really enjoy of this meal,
Yes.
50%, sure. But of the things that I'm like, this is really good, but it's not my favorite thing, okay, 30%. Like just having that ability to regulate and not necessarily restrict. I think there's reward kind of baked in.
Yeah, and part of the reward is you giving yourself that pause, right? Dopamine is all about the pursuit, which I think we've all been like beat over the head with. We all know that. But it really is about even like you get that from that regulation perspective. And yeah, that's the difference of what is restriction versus what is restraint. And when we're able to apply that in our life and say, okay, maybe I don't need this right now, but maybe if I do come back to it and I really want it, in like in your example, like if I really like set this goal and I hit this and I still want it, okay, cool, I'll get it. And then I'll know that like that was actually something that I really wanted. And the example for me with the coffee that day, that was a really quick kind of fleeting example. But my day, I never thought about it once again until this podcast, right? So if it had been something that was really on my mind, right, like the next day and the next day, okay, let me go get that coffee because I really want like small things like that, but we develop those regulation mechanisms and that is so satisfying in the process. And it doesn't matter what your goals are, it will be useful. And then the last thing, I did come back tab. I have a bad tendency of that. So when we were talking about the untracked meals, so that is something that I do love, but I do ideally add those in beforehand. So I do want to make sure that everybody gets that. It's not like something where I've dieted a client for however long for, you know, either a lifestyle cut or for a competition. And then I'm like, hey, let's add in this really hard thing after your show. Like we've already worked on untracked meals in a non-dieting phase when everything else is kind of stable, everything else is regulated, calories are high, everything's kind of just like rocking and rolling. So we've already developed the skills of untracked meals before a diet. So when I do add them back in, it's not like this whole shocking system. It's still a shock. It's still different than they're maybe used to, but it's not like we're adding a hard thing to an already hard situation. So I did want to make sure that that was clear, because if someone like hasn't tried it and then it's like, okay, well, let me try it. It's I say go for it, but it is just know it's going to be harder than if you had done it before the diet part.
No, no, absolutely. And I mean, even to piggyback off of that is like the way in which you diet, like the way that you are ending that diet, whether it's fat loss or physique competition sports, it's going to ultimately leach into the degree of willpower you have post.